Today, let's meet Ernest Thompson Seton. He's one of the founders of the Boy Scouts of America, and his passion for nature inspired our movement. Hey, ScouterStan. Let's talk about Ernest Thompson Seton. He's one of the founders of the Boy Scouts of America way back in the beginning. And he has a fascinating history. And he's a prolific author, naturalist. He was all about right where, the turn of the 19th, going into 1900, going into into the 20th century. That was big. That was big. And there was a lot of things going on in that time that really inspired the entire scouting movement early on. Seton was born in England on August 14th, 1860. He immigrated with his family to Canada when he was a toddler. So there's a lot of writing about his early years that he actually autobiographied a lot of that material. There's a lot of that out there on the internet. Now, he had a lot of influence through Canadian backwoods and the wildlife and all of that living at that period of time. Keep in mind that the United States was currently had either just finished the Civil War. It was a long time ago when he was a child in Canada. So it's a little bit different, but he was more focused on nature, and he really started loving to draw, different animals and nature and environments and stuff like that was really his focus very early on. Seton took on the career of being a naturalist and an author with a premier book that came out in 1893 was Wild Animals I Have Known. And that was his first introduction to the literary world of his naturalist and his understanding, his take of nature. Now, keep in mind, this was new. This was new. We look back on it and think of it as something that we take for granted. But this was a very new way of thinking about nature. Now, after several more books, in 1903, he wrote Two Little Savages. Now, this was a new concept. This was something that was of that time. And that's something to really understand. This individual was a product of that time and was trying to convey the naturalist ideas through his writing. Now, back in 1893, he was actually involved with the Campfire organization, and it was trying to get more youth interested in the naturalist cause. Seton actually formed an organization called the Woodcraft Indians. Now, this organization in 1903 was very active in recruiting and getting people interested in naturalists. Now, he used the American native motif, which was very, very popular. And a lot of people think of it as being insensitive, but prior to that, it was ignored. So there's good and bad there. So you have to understand he's a product of the time. And Indian lore, the Great West, was a big deal in the United States, and this was very appealing to a lot of the American youth to get involved into Woodcraft Indian. Now, when Boyce came back, he was really interested in getting it together as a Boy Scouts of America. just like what he had witnessed in England. And if you'd like more information about William Du Bois and what his experience was, I'm going to put a link. That's the Where Did Scouting Come From video. So that one gives you more details about it. But Boyce was a writer, and he was able to get with Seton and kind of form up the idea of the American Boy Scouts of America. Now, Seton already has his Woodcraft Indians. That's an organization. So naturally, moving that over or morphing it into the Boy Scouts of America seems a natural thing to do. Seton had written the birch bark rolls and actually had a lot of the principles that were very similar and easy to move over to scouting's ideas that Baden-Powell had actually put together. Now, BP's writings kind of matched up a lot with the naturalist movement that was going on in between 1900 and 1920. It was somewhere in that range. That was where the naturalist movement was really picking up speed. Now, the writings of Baden-Powell, or BP as he preferred to be called, BP's writings were then picked up by Seton and put together into the very first Boy Scouts of America handbook. There is a lot of similarities between the birch bark rolls, which is hard to say, and the regular handbook that we think of as the first handbook. There's a lot of similarities. A lot of the wording and everything very similar. In fact, Seton's name is on the cover of the first edition of that handbook. Seton had a focus on outdoor skills, which was very along the lines of BP. He also was very much a naturalist, so he wanted nature to be a focus. And in that, because of nature and of that time, Indian lore was also a big part of that. And that's kind of hearkening back to Seton's formation of his original group, which became the Boy Scouts of America. So that's kind of the core beginning of it. Now, as far as Indian lore goes, you have to keep this in mind. It's 1903 to 1910. And that's a time period that people either thought badly of Indians, American natives, or they had no idea. So there was a lot of stuff that was kind of made up, and and because of that, we have to think of this. It's a thing of their time. Okay, we evolve constantly. We will evolve even in the future. It's a scouting movement. So that is something that we are moving forward with. But in that time, that was a huge focus. It was very appealing too. A lot of the American youth were listening to the new thing, radio, and actually coming up in the early teens, they had these shows where they had the Native Americans representative, good or bad, and it was something that was very interesting. It caught the attention of young people, and that was huge at that time. Now, of course, all of this has evolved into the scouting program we know today, and it took a long time and many generations to do that. Hey, before we go any further, I want to make sure that you are invited to come to the live meeting. The live meeting is on the first Sunday of each month at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So please join us. Now, you're going to have to adjust for whatever time zone you're in. But please join us and join in. That's a great way to ask questions, and I'm there to answer them. Also, I want to personally thank all of the patrons on Patreon for their continued financial support. Also, If you would like to become a channel member right here on YouTube, hit the join button and go through that process. It's a great way to help fund what you see here. If you don't want to do a monthly donation, that's fine. We have a thank you button. Just hit the thank you button and make a one-time donation. That is always appreciated. And let's get right back to it. Now, with anything in scouting, there's always conflicts and issues that need to be settled. These are things that happen throughout scouting. And Seton had some problems. Early on, between Baden-Powell and Seton, they had their own writings. And combining them and putting them together, there were some issues. There were some issues between the different writing and the different ideologies between the BP's, Baden-Powell's group that was more towards youth leadership, whereas Seton's was more towards Indian craft and naturalist, so there was some issues there, and they worked out most of them. They were good scouts, which is interesting because if you look at some of the videos about the scout law, just an example, the scout law itself in the United States uses key words, whereas in other parts of the world they don't. They use a whole speech for the scout law. So keeping that in mind, if you'd like to look at that videos, who wrote the Scout Law, that's a big video. Check that one out. That one talks about where it actually came from. There were 12 points to the youth organization known as the Woodcraft Indians. There were 12 individual points or laws, and in the British type of law, if you look for the key words, there's only 9. So 10 today, but it's interesting, where all those came from. So definitely check out that video. Now the birch bark roll for the Woodcraft Indians. That Seton was the organizer and wrote that book, and how that was combined with the first Scout Handbook. That the original birchback roll was back in 1906 until 1910. They really didn't have a book per se for the Boy Scouts of America. So they were using a lot of that information, a lot of that organization, moving it over. And it was losing some of the focus for the naturalists and going to leadership. So it was kind of a different thing. And that was a huge change. And there were some hurt feelings in all of that. But in the early days of the Boy Scouts of America, 1910 to about 1915, Seton was active and did a lot of influencing of the scouting organization and movement. In that time, they brought on James E. West. They brought on a lot of the founders of scouting were involved. In the United States, the Boy Scouts of America, those were all being put into place. The first Chief Scout of the Boy Scouts of America, James E. West, and that's another video, but he was involved, and there were some issues. There were some problems. You have to remember that Seton was British-born Canadian. And it's the Boy Scouts of America. So there was some problems that citizenship was kind of important, and in the Boy Scouts of America, and having a founder that's not even American, that was an issue. And there were some other issues. Seton's wife was very active in the suffrage movement, and this was something that was, it's a thing of its time. It was kind of looked down on, with men having wives involved in such a radical idea like women's right to vote. That was a radical idea, okay? So you have to look at this stuff from their lens, okay? You can't think of it today, because today we'd be infuriated. So, but that is the times, and there were some problems there, not only with the activism in Seton's wife actually being very involved with the suffrage movement through Canada and America and so on. It was huge. It was huge, and of course, it was important that the Boy Scouts of America at that time be only by Americans, run by Americans. That was their ideal at that time. At beginning of 1915, Seton left the scouting movement. He officially resigned and moved on to write books and do a lot of naturalist stuff. This was very important because in 1916, the Congress actually did the charter, federal charter of the Boy Scouts of America, and that's where it all started, where it began, the foundation of what scouting actually was. Now, Seton went on as a naturalist, wrote books and articles, and became a very published author and artist. He did a lot of drawings of nature, and that was huge for that time, to make sure that this was being communicated still. There was still that naturalist movement that he was involved in. Now, even though Seton was no longer part of the Boy Scouts, he was the huge influence that they maintained. They wanted that naturalist, that environmentally conscious idea to be part of the movement. That was huge, and they kept that, and they have that even today, represented by multiple merit badges and a lot of the scouting skills, like leave no trace and that kind of thing. These are all evolved from what Seton was about and what he did and what we do. So he was amazingly important to the movement. Now, by 1931, Seton had decided to move or officially immigrate and become a U.S. citizen. He immigrated into the United States officially, and that was his residence for the rest of his life. He never abandoned his ideas of being a naturalist, and all the art and stuff that he did. That all just culminated in so many different articles and books that if you're interested in some of that foundation of where naturalist behavior and naturalist ideas come from, that is one of the things that Seton was really all about. To see those core values raw, historically raw. So you got to keep that in mind. That is one of those things. He is a founding father and should be honored because a lot of his ideas live on within the scouting movement. Even today, looking back so many years ago, over 100, it's amazing. And it's a legacy that will live on probably forever. Now, I'm going to leave some links in the description of the video. So if you have a chance, hit the more information link, and that will take you to a link page after the description of all of the different things that you can look up some more information about Ernest Thomas Seton. It is one of those amazing subjects, and we do so much for our scouts, but knowing the origins of where things come from helps us teach them better. So that is so important. But always keep in mind, the people of the past are from the past. We can't judge them here in the future. Okay, they're the past. That's one of those things. You just have to keep that in mind as you do research, because if you look at some of the ancient past, it was brutal. Okay, we know that, but they didn't. So you have to keep that in mind. And so when you're historically looking past, don't let any of that stuff get you upset. Just learn from it and be able to use that information. That's the key. That's the thing about history. History is so important. You can't put your point of view on it because you're not part of that time. So always keep that in mind. And the time that we are is now. And your influence over young people is tremendous. Please keep up that good, hard work. We're building a better America with better leaders using the scouting values to really make good, ethical, and logical decisions. And that is very important. This is something they don't teach in school. So it is a great thing. And I'm so grateful for all that you do in scouting. And if you get a chance, I will put a link up right there that'll actually talk a little bit about the Scout Law and how it started. So till next time, I'll see you on the trail.